So you have an ASP.NET Core 2.0 project, and now 2.1's out, and soon, further versions. So it's important that we keep on top of the progression, and then we upgrade our projects. So we're going to take our ASP.NET Core Fasetto Word server project and upgrade it to 2.1. So let's get to it. So the first thing we'll do is just open up our project. We'll upgrade all NuGet packages. We'll make sure everything's up to date first. And then the best thing in this case is, to be honest, to follow Microsoft's own documentation on how to upgrade. They do a really good job of documentation these days. They've come a long way in the last 3-4 years with .NET Core documentation, all this kind of thing. So we can practically just follow their well-written documentation. But we'll do it together so you can see all the little intricacies, and I can talk through some more details that the actual documentation doesn't go into depth as much as I'd want to. So let's just start by opening the project up. So we have the server project open here. So now we're going to open, let's just make sure it builds. And as long as it builds, which it does, and just because we know this is a stable project as well, this is one we work on all the time. We're now just going to jump into migrate from ASP.NET Core 2.0 to 2.1. And I'll put this link in the video description. So we're just going to work our way through this. It tells us what the article covers. It's saying the quick way to get an overview is to create an ASP.NET Core 2.0 project, commit the changes, delete it, create a 2.1, and then review the changes in effectively Git. So I'm not going to bother doing too extreme like that. What I will do though is just quickly create a new project in general. So I will create a 2.0 project. Make sure Visual Studio is updated in the top corner here first. Then make a new ASP.NET Core web app. And then I'm just going to make an MVVM. You'll notice it also has HTTPS enabled here, and that's to the new EU regulations that we'll talk about shortly, that we have to start complying to in terms of users' data and allowing them to delete it and giving them consent and, all good stuff. So this is a 2.1 project. We'll just build that. And if that builds, we'll just put it in the background for now and come back to it when we've done our migration as just a double check. So we'll carry on. We'll start with the obvious, which is change the project to 2.1. Now it's telling us we can do that in the effectively right-clicking edit CS Proj, and we can update this here. You can also just right-click the project, click Properties, and change it here. So we changed to 2.1 there and save. You'll notice it's changed it here for us. So that's step one. Then replace package reference for ASP.NET Core All with ASP.NET Core App. Okay, so that is in the CS Proj file we are in. That's here. So change that to App, basically. The version number probably isn't going to match, but when we now, I presume, right-click and manage NuGet packages, which you should also do at this point to upgrade everything, there's different versions available. So let's just select everything and update everything so all the packages are now as up-to-date as they can be. And this might take a little while because it's uninstalling the whole of the ASP.NET Core references, re-adding them all as the new style. And we'll probably have to accept the licenses, which it'll be fetching, so this might take a few seconds. So while it's doing that, let's just flick back to here. So replace those references, add individual packages back, we don't have any. Remove references to .NET CLI tool references for these 4 things. Optional, remove it for this. I think we've got this one. I think we've just seen that. I don't think we have any of those. So let's just look for code generation tools. Let's accept that now it's ready. There we go. So we're all up to date on the packages. Jump back into here. There is our code generation tools CLI tool reference. So delete that like it tells us to. And I'm guessing that's been replaced by the global tool they're saying. So we don't need that. For 2.1, a Razor class library is recommended. Now, for Razor pages, I don't use them. And the reason I don't use them is mainly because they are heavily tied in with ASP.NET Core and running in an ASP.NET Core server. So if we ever wanted to in the future to change to another server, I doubt we would, but the whole point of everything we typically do is to keep it modular and small. Razor pages are going to create a fairly hard defined link between the backend server and the front end website, which I don't want. So for that reason alone, I won't be using Razor pages. We'll be maybe just temporarily just returning views and things for quickly get on with the front end, but we won't ultimately end up using anything to do with Razor, and we will strip out Razor pages to keep the front end totally separate. So we won't be using that Razor page. So now it's telling us, here is an example markup of an old project, which looks similar to ours. We didn't have a package reference to that, but we did have the tool reference down here. And then the following shows the generated one. So basically, 2 has changed to 2.1, and they've removed the references there, basically. They've also removed the code generation in the main reference. Let's make sure we didn't have that. Oh, we did. Let's also remove that then. So we don't need that in there. And now, what's next? Rules for project targeting, shared runtimes. You can read that. Not relevant to us. Update Docker images. Changed advantage of the new ideasm. So, ideasm, is it ideasm? Yeah, idiom's not ideasm. So, main changes. They have a new startup class style, which they basically just moved the build out to there for unit testing by the looks of it, and just renamed it. So let's do that. That also makes it look like there's a big change. That's a very kind of, why didn't they just say they've moved build to outside and then rename the function? That's kind of all they've done. So they want to call it create web host builder. Create web host builder. Okay, so let's jump into our startup. They've now renamed, not startup, sorry, program. We've named this to create web host builder, I think. And it will now return a web host builder, I guess, instead of a web host. The build will just cut out and move to there. And that's basically what they've done. So that's all they were doing there. They just, to me, that just looks a bit more, I know it's a code change view, but would have been easier to describe it as that. They've just moved a build out and renamed it. So that's the new startup style. What else? Changes to startup. So the following code changes for 2.1 template are generated. All newly added code except used browser link, which was removed. So they've added cookie policies. This will be the, I always forget, GPDR or GRPD. I always forget which way around it is. So this will be for consent to cookies by the looks of it. So we should definitely put that in. So let's copy that and put that in. So we'll go to our startup now. They are doing it at the top of their configure services. Let's follow suit. And then I think you should mention GRPD or something below. GDPR. Never remember which way around. GDPR. Right. So GDPR. Shall we do add proper cookie request to follow GDPR. There we go. And then this is just configuring a cookie policy, which is new in 2.1. And then they've already given us a comment here. This Lambda determines whether the user consents for non-essential cookies, and it's needed for a given request. So that's part of this GDPR, that we can't just gather information about the user without asking. Control dot on this and include the namespace. So by default, they're saying they need to consent to non-essential cookies. So our login, when the user logs into the site, that's an essential cookie for the site to work. So that we don't need a request for. But if we were to store any non-essential cookies, just general information or tracking data, then we definitely need this. So we basically put that in. That will force the cookie options to say we need consent. Now, I presume we need to actually use the cookies. So yeah, use cookie policy. So we'll get to that in a minute. Set compatibility version. Now this basically states, and I'll leave a link in the description, that there are potential breaking changes as things progress in code. So as the user gets further and further into using .NET 2.1, then 2.2, then 3.0, the biggest issue Microsoft had before was the progression of these abilities and code changes. And what Microsoft always did before was to maintain legacy support all the way back to almost the beginning. The same thing that like websites do and everything. But what that causes is a really slow progression of advancement in code due to having to support everything previously. So this set compatibility basically states that if you're happy to say your code is up to date to 2.1 and you don't need legacy support before that, when you set the compatibility version minimum to 2.1, the MVC specific part of ASP.NET Core will now be happy to use anything that's only supported by 2.1 onwards. So if they had to change some security or some way that cookies work to make it faster, but the way they changed that would break any code that was originally written for 2.0, then that would actually be a breaking change. But if we explicitly consent to say we're happy that we are 2.1 compliant, it can use newer code. So that's kind of basically the point of that. So that's what that set compatibility version is. So we'll dump that in. And again, the one thing, they've done great documentation here, but I do find it slightly lacking in real detail. Like, well, if you configure that, where's that happening? What's going on? Well, that doesn't happen until you set use cookie policy, and it doesn't happen on your login credentials because they're essential. So it doesn't tell you what's non-essential. It just lacks a little bit more detail that I'd like. Same as this set compatibility version, but doesn't really tell you much about what it is. And even if you go to the link here on set compatibility version, it just basically says it will set it to be compatible, but doesn't tell you what that means. So that's why I kind of like to give that a little bit more detail. So we have the cookie policy ready, the options configured. We haven't set to use it yet. The MVC, they've got the add MVC, and then they put the set compatibility version here. So we will basically state we are compatible, or we are a minimum compatibility of 2.1 onwards. Control dot on that and include. So that, as I mentioned, won't really change much because we are using all 2.1 code. Whenever you change this, though, you should test your code thoroughly to make sure things didn't break that you might think you've accounted for but haven't. So that's those two. We then have now HSTS. Again, use HSTS, and they only use it in production here. They don't really state why or what this is again. So they just say it's HTTPS and you need HTTPS. But my question was then, when you first migrate, well, why is it only in production? If you're saying you need HTTPS all the way through, when we finish with this and we spin up in the development mode, we still have HTTPS. So what's HSTS? And you can read up what it is, your strict transport protocol, but it doesn't state in the ASP.NET Core code why we've added that and why only in production. So what the HSTS does is simply add a header to the request in HTTPS calls. So say you open a browser now, HTTPS localhost, and we go to our website now that's running HTTPS. It will be in a minute. Once you run as HTTPS, the HSTS will add a header to that call that tells the browser that you should not serve any requests that are not secured by HTTPS. So if you then go to a normal website, HTTP, for that domain, the browser itself won't even bother serving that call. It will then redirect you to the secure version. So the point of HSTS, I know I've said that a lot now, is to basically tell the browser in advance, listen, I'm a secure website. I don't want you even trying to access my HTTP section. So please redirect your clients to the secure side. And it's more of prevents a round trip from the user trying to access the insecure site, being bounced back and told, no, you need to redirect to here, then redirecting. So it's a browser-specific thing, and all it is a header that gets added to kind of tell the browser, so Firefox, Chrome, Safari, whatever. It'll say, please don't try and access my site insecurely, just go straight to the secure site. So that's what that's doing. And the reason it's only in production is because once you set this, and once you tell your browser to only go to HTTPS, in development, you might then change that back, and if you change it back straight away, your browser is going to keep redirecting you to HTTPS without you even, thinking that's what should happen, because this is kind of like a static thing to the browser. You tell the browser, I want to do this, and it will remember it for, you can configure the time, but typically half an hour a day. So it can cause issues in development where you're wondering why you're getting this redirect in the browser. So that's why they're not doing it in the development side. But again, they don't tell you anything about that. That's what you have to find out by basically all I've done is used it, played with it, and figured out what it does and when it does it. So that's literally how I've discovered what happens. So we'll do the same here. So only when we are in production, and I will now include the comment that states this. Tell the browsers via the Hsts header to only try and access our site via HTTPS, not HTTP. So that's a much more descriptive comment. That's all it would have taken to make that really obvious to anyone looking what's going on. Then the next step is use HTTPS redirection. So this, as I basically just mentioned, is now in our website. So if somebody tries to hit up our website on HTTP, we don't want to be serving that anymore. From this point on, everything should be HTTPS, full stop, in all websites. That's again part of this regulation. There's no more reason or excuse to not be a secure website at all. So we add the redirection. That means if anyone ever tried to access the insecure site, the ASP.NET Core server itself will forcefully redirect all those calls to HTTPS. So the first one, HSTS, was the client browser being told to do that. And then the fallback is our own server saying, well, if you've managed to ignore that, or it's your first call to our site and you've gone insecure, we will forcefully redirect to that site. So that's why that's kind of added for all, not just specific to development or production. That's all the time. So we'll add that now. We can do it after here and redirect all calls from HTTP to HTTPS. Then what else do we have? We have the use cookie policy. So this now is the one that I mentioned, tells effectively the underlying identity server right now, which is the only thing we use. If we jump into, say, the home controller, and we have the user manager, the sign-in manager, these things access what's called the identity. So it's built into ASP.NET Core, this identity. This ultimately writes cookies for us. So when we set the use cookie policy, the identity server listens to this for one, but because they are essential cookies, it writes anyway. But anything that then tries to write cookies in ASP.NET Core will listen to this cookie policy, and if they're not essential cookies, they won't be written. So this is what forces anyone trying to write a cookie to obey the policy that we made up here, there. So they've got to set essential cookies. We don't use cookies that aren't essential right now, so there's nothing to dig into, but this is what it's doing. So it's ready for when we do. So force non-essential cookies to only store if the user has consent. Consented? Is that how you spell consented? Not sure. Yeah, I'll auto correct it if it's wrong after. Yeah. Well, I've got consent spelled up here. It's funny, one of them words I can't think how to spell. Yeah, I think it's right. Doesn't look right, but it must be. Right then, so that's that. Next up. I think that's it. So they're the changes. The preceding changes are detailed, so I'd recommend you reading these on top of what I'm describing. So this is a GDPR regulation. This will describe what's required and what happens. We've covered everything in here. So we've done that bit of code change. We've added the cookie policy. This then just shows you the default template that's used to automatically pop up with all the UI. We're going to make our own, so that doesn't really matter. There's a bit on HSTS, but again, doesn't really mention what I just described of when it happens and how and why. But again, it's in here. So that's that. We've got the require HTTPS, which we've just done as well, and the set compatibility version. So changes to authentication code. ASP Core 2.1 provides core identity as Razor class pages. Well, we're not using the UI, so that entire kind of thing doesn't matter to us. So we can skip that. Update identity, fully support. It's all the UI stuff again. That's UI stuff, so we don't use any of that. Scaffolding, don't use any of that. So all that's based on their own UI that we don't use. Changes to the Razor pages we're not using, changes to MVCs, this is just general changes now. So that's basically the document done. So we can close that down. So what we have now is the changes here. Now you'll also notice straight away, I already know, we haven't told the site to listen on HTTPS. So even though that document tells us what to do to update the code like this, it's never told us to actually update the launch settings of where we're listening. So this is where now we will take the new one here, the newly built one, and we'll just scrub through all the files. So the first thing we're going to do is look at the CS Proj file, and then we will side by side them, minimize that. Right, so we have the new one at the bottom, our one at the top. So we can see we've got, for one, we've got any CPUs or platforms that they don't seem to bother with anymore. It seems to be by default, it's included that. So let's clean up that. Doesn't tell us to, but I'm going to. Content remove style.xaml. Never seen that. Let's just remove that. Email template, that's our template that we made, and that's because it's an embedded resource. So that's just making sure it doesn't get included in the compiler. And then we have it there, so that's fine being in. We have, in fact, this is their whole project, so they have just one reference and one file. So we have the one reference, we have our 3 references, and then we've got our email template, They also don't bother with the www root include anymore. And we have a project reference, which is fine. So we've removed quite a bit there. Let's just maximize that up again. And maximize that up. So we've removed quite a few little bits there, which were basically the root, the style, and the any CPU, which they don't tell you in that document, but they're not in the new project, so they obviously aren't needed. So we'll save that now, and that should still build. So there we go. So we've done more cleanup based on simply observing changes ourselves in the Proj file. So let's now just take a look at the next file. Dependencies we don't care about, that's irrelevant to what we're doing. Launch settings. So we remove IIS settings and IIS, we only use Kestrel. So we're only interested in this part. You can see theirs, as expected, has got HTTPS, as well as a local host. So we'll copy them and, or copy or paste, doesn't really matter, we just basically add one before it, so HTTPS. Let's just do localhost colon 5555 for now, just to be really obvious that we're different. And then they're not bothering with the forward slashes, so we can get rid of those. So now we're going to listen on 2 URLs. One will be the secure and one will be the insecure, which this will simply get redirected to here if they try to access it. And obviously in production, you'd typically be listening on the actual native ports like that, so they don't explicitly type port numbers in. So that is the launch settings file. The root we're not bothered about, it's all about the UI, controllers, models, views. We're not bothered about any of that, we don't use any of that. App settings is just app settings. They do have allowed hosts in there, but again, they haven't told us what that's for. Do we have it already, or do we not? So we don't have allowed hosts in here, or rather, yeah, allowed hosts. So we should probably just quickly Google what allowed hosts is, because again, they haven't told us. So ASP.NET Core, allowed hosts. And this is what I'd usually do. If they've given me an option and I haven't seen what it's for, I certainly don't just add it because it's there. I want to know what it's for. So, blah, blah, blah. Let's see where allowed hosts is in this. Host filtering middleware disable to enable it, define allowed hosts in a separate blah, blah, blah. So we're not filtering by specific host names. So it's kind of pointless because it's saying by default it's disabled. So by specifying allowed hosts, they are just enabling it, but then passing everything through. So whether they've just got it there for obvious, quick and easy being able to edit that, but I think the whole point of it being default is that you don't need to specify it. So we're not going to do that. The program file we've already done, that's the same. The startup, set compatibility version, use Hsts, redirect cookies. So that's all the same. So I'm happy now we have a migrated project file now from 2.0 to 2.1. You can see we've also done some changes here that are not commented or mentioned, and we've also dug a little bit deeper into the changes. So now it's time to spin it up and make sure the basic functions still work. And then obviously you would do more intense testing, but we'll do that in the next video when we're adding functions to this website. So let's just go and basically test that this thing runs, I guess, with F5. Let's just see if this spins up. Now you can see this new option straight away. The project is configured to use SSL. To avoid SSL warnings in the browser, you can choose to trust this self-signed cert. So let's just choose no for the minute. And let's see what would happen, because a thing with HTTPS is you can't just make a certificate yourself and all the world believes in it. You have to either pay a specific person, like DigiCert, or a trusted certificate authority to generate you these at a cost usually, or you get this warning that, hang on, we can't trust this secure connection because you've effectively secured it yourself. You've made this certificate yourself. So this is going to be the warning you get. Then you'd have to click advanced, then add exception, and this is what an actual end user would have to do, and they're not going to do that. They're going to see that and just run away. So that's there for a reason. So if we look at the certificate, you can see it's been the certificate authority is localhost. It's been issued by us, so it's kind of not trusted. Whereas if you went to say like Google and click up here and go to the secure connection, more info, view cert, you can see Google, funnily enough, is its own certificate authority, which you'd expect from a large company like that. But like, for example, my site, so Angel 6, you can see if you go to mine, or I also need to enable HTTPS on my main site, actually, like the redirect. So we go to here and view certificate. You can see I pay DigiCert for my certificates, but that means that my website's trusted. It's green, so anyone in the world can browse it securely, whereas we can't here. So anyway, long story short, when you go into production, we will need to put a secure certificate on there, and we will do trying to use a free method. So I'm going to try and find us a free SSL certificate authority so everybody can do it. But for now in development, when you press F5, we click yes to this now, it's going to automatically do it for us and warn us that this isn't really valid. Do you want to trust it? So it's going to install that certificate into our own system, so our own Windows machine recognizes that certificate and trusts it. So now it hasn't actually worked. We are getting the decryption failed, no exception, no occurred. So something is failing with this. And this is, so what we'll do next then is let's just quickly Google this. ASP.NET Core HTTPS. And we'll start with this. And let's see, this is fairly recent, and let's see how many people have had the same issue. And if not, we'll dig deep ourselves. I would advise against restricting the security to CLS1. I recommend the solution is this. So this is telling us to basically change the way that it's restricted to only a certain one. But this is fairly new, and I presume .NET Core, SendGrid. Well, no. It's funny how we're using SendGrid, but I don't think that's related. So that's just coincidence. Also look at the time as well to make sure we're not too far out with the dates. If it's that old, it's not relevant. And the other interesting thing is, I can't view this. It's like it's not even serving the certificate. It's almost like there's actually an issue with the .NET Core code for serving this, because it can't get the certificate. We can also try another browser. I don't even have Chrome installed. Let's try Edge. Just see if this works. So this works. This can also see it. It's almost like Firefox doesn't want to serve or handle that certificate the same. Or maybe this is just a cached issue. Maybe there's updates to that. So I should probably download Chrome then as well. Let's download and install the world's slowest internet browser. And let them spy on everything I do. This will be getting uninstalled the minute this test is done. So let's get this installed and let's see. So it's partly potentially an issue with Firefox. I'm not too concerned at the minute because this is my local dev machine. When we publish to the real server, we'll use a real certificate. This is just a self-signed certificate. So it's not like it's the end of the world. There's no major issue here because it's our own machines. So that works as well. So I'll uninstall that in a minute. So it's literally an issue with just Firefox. So for now, I am going to, let's not permanently store this exception. Let's just do it once to show. And now, can we view it? So now we can view the certificates. That's really strange. It's a Firefox specific issue looking at that then. So I don't know. See if anyone's got a solution to this. See if you guys get it first. Let's see if anyone gets the same issue on a Firefox. But for now, I'm just going to kind of ignore that. When we come to push it to a real website, like our Fasetto.chat website, then we will obviously get a real certificate and this won't be an issue. But it's just interesting how that happens on Firefox only. So I'll look at fixing it afterwards maybe. But let me know if you guys get it first as well. That's the more interesting thing. So if we just run this now, we can then just check the site works basically to make sure nothing's broken. And then like I say, we'll do more tests afterward. So one of the tests, what can we do? Let's take a look at home control. We've got this running. I've already got a user. Let's try log in and then look at the cookies maybe. So we press F12, go to network, refresh. You'll see right now we have no cookies and we've got a response. Let's just type /login, which is our default fake. Well, it's a real login, but just refreshes the page and logs in. So that logs in. Here's the cookie, HTTP only true, secure true. And then the next request has now got the cookie, and if we refresh again, we've now got that cookie in. So we can confirm that cookies are still being set with that new code correctly because they're essential ones. And the website generally looks like it's working. Obviously, that is a very small test to make sure all those changes haven't broke. But like I say, the very next thing we're doing is adding new functionality, so it's going to get a test that way. So this is also kind of showing you that going through the steps one by one, you can identify errors, and that's what most people get stuck on. That's why I've kind of done this guide here, if you will, to show you that errors do happen, and then what we do. In this case of the certificate not being fine on Firefox, start digging ourselves. We can open Certificate Manager, look at the root certificate, see where it's installed, but the fact that the other browsers serve it shows that it is being served and it does work, and it's more than likely that it's either a very new certificate that is a new standard of TLS that Firefox doesn't know about, which is unlikely. What's more than likely is Firefox is simply doing its own check as well as Windows and saying, well, I don't understand it. Just because your machine does, I'm going to ignore it. Should be some quirk maybe in Firefox. So at that point, we could dig deeper and start going to the Firefox forums and looking if anyone's got it, or digging deeper ourselves. But to be honest, this is a developer machine HTTPS certificate that we can just manually add in Firefox if we want to get past that, because we know it's us, so it's kind of not an issue. But as I mentioned, when it goes to a real website, that's not an option, but that won't be an issue. So it's kind of one of those areas where I'd go so far, but then I'm happy to just leave that because it's of no relevance right now to what we're doing. But I am interested if you guys get that error as well, so do let me know. So hopefully this video was useful, and I hope you've learned something from it, and let me know what you think about it.